Okay, this is the third part of the Illustrator tutorial. In here we're going to talk about curves, other ways of constructing lines, making shapes, transforming objects, moving things around, using grids and snaps, scaling, arranging, and using layers. So we've got a lot to cover. We've so far made line segments and polylines, but we can also make curves or compound curves. So we can use the pen tool to do this as well. And instead of clicking and setting a series of points like we were with our polylines, what we're going to do is click and drag. So I'm going to click a point and then drag out from it. And you see these little blue lines with kind of squares on the end of them. They're called handles. And these allow for you to adjust the kind of curvature between lines. So I'm clicking and dragging to kind of control what the curve looks like. And then when I'm done setting these lines, I can click on the selection tool to be able to go back and pick it all as one thing, or I can use the direct selection to go in and click on one of these points at a time, and the handles reappear and they let me kind of go in and start fine-tuning the curve. So the way handles work are that the location and the distance of the end of the handle from the anchor point or the kind of center point control how much it curves something, right? So if my anchor point is really far away, it's going to have a lot of weight to it, or it's going to pull really, really hard in that direction. And if it's really close, it's going to be more of like a sharper or more abrupt turn. So you can go in, drawing curves in this manner is something that takes some practice to be able to control what it is that you want. So I would suggest that you go in and start adjusting and playing with drawing some of these curves, because right now I've got this really kind of terrible lumpy curve. If I want to go in and start smoothing that or adjusting that, I have to go in and start fine-tuning how these things are working together. So I would want to, have this be a little bit more in line with itself, and maybe this guy rotates this way a bit more, and so it starts to kind of smooth things out a bit. This one's still pretty lumpy, so maybe I want to do something like this, and that starts smoothing it out. You can also add, remove, or adjust anchor points. So if I press and hold on the pen tool, you can see that I can add, delete, or convert anchor points. So if I want to add one, I can click anywhere along the line and it will put in a new anchor point that I can adjust with. So I can either move it around or just have a little bit more of controllability in the line. If I press and hold and click delete, I can get rid of that anchor point without breaking the line. I can also just take a point and delete it, but it will delete everything that's between those lines. And then lastly, I can convert an anchor point. So I can go either from a curving anchor point to a rectilinear one by clicking there, so it makes it kind of a 0-degree radius on that curve. And I can do that all along, so I can convert my my curving line into a rectilinear one, or when I have kind of a rectilinear shape, I can use that same option to turn it into a curve. So I can take that kind of base and convert it into something curving. Okay. There are a couple other ways of constructing lines. I mentioned these are kind of embedded in the line segment tool, so I can make a line as an arc. And I can kind of click and drag to draw that, or I can click on the arc tool and then click a point to set the length of it. So if I want it to be 2 inches in both directions, and I want it to be an open arc, I can do that through the dialog box. You can also draw a freehand line using the pencil tool, which is here on the right, below the kind of shapes. So I click on the pencil tool and I just start drawing. So I'm moving my mouse around, and once I am done drawing, it will convert that into some combination of kind of abrupt and smooth turns. So I can, write my name badly, or I can sign something, or there's a lot of different types of things that you can do with the pencil tool. Under the pencil tool is also a smoothing tool, so if I'm not so good at drawing these lines, I can go in and start adjusting this a bit, and it will start smoothing out the curves as much as it can. So I'm kind of drawing along this line that's selected. It won't do it on lines that are not selected, so I would have to go in and pick this guy, and then use the smooth tool, which is this one here. And it will let me kind of go in and start smoothing curves a bit. So that's kind of the basic way of drawing different types of lines. If you want to make two-dimensional objects or things that are not just line-based, you can use shapes. There are a series of kind of default shapes, so rectangles, rounded rectangles, ellipses, which also include circles, polygons, which you can set the number of sides, stars, which are polygons that have the kind of sides pulled in or out, and then the flare tool isn't something that you would be using while drawing two-dimensional shapes. So it's pretty straightforward. You click on the rectangle, click a point, and drag to set the other point, or with the rectangle tool selected, you can click on the artboard and type in, if I want a 4x4 rectangle or square, I can type that in and it'll make that specific shape for me. The rounded rectangle tool lets you make a rounded rectangle, obviously, and it will allow for you to go in and adjust, let's see, object, transform. There's a place that you can go in and adjust the corner, the kind of radius on the edge of the rectangle. I'm forgetting offhand where that is. It's somewhere really, really simple, and I always forget where it is. But anyway, you can go in, I'll find it and let you know in class, and adjust the kind of corner. So, yeah, we're not going to waste time doing that. But anyway, it lets you, the rounded rectangle tool gives you a rectangle with kind of a radiused corner. And I think it might be that you can just go in with the direct selection tool and adjust what that corner looks like. But there's a place that you can go in, oh, I just saw it, and make those corners yourself. The ellipsis tool, the one below that, lets you draw ellipses, or if you hold down shift it will let you draw circles. And again, you can just click on the artboard and it will bring up a dialog box. If you want a 2-inch circle, you would want an ellipse that has 2 inches as its dimension in both directions. If you want to transform objects, so if I have a rectangle and it's not where I want it to be or the size I want it to be, or any object for that matter, you know, lines, paragraph boxes, or boxes of type, or text, the easiest way to start controlling that is with the transform dialog box. I'm going to bring that guy up here just so that you can see it. And I'm going to first look at this object over here on the left hand side. This kind of 9-square little diagram here is kind of the reference point selector. So what that means is if I select the center as my reference point, it's measuring everything in terms of the location of my object from that center point. So if I want to put the top left corner of the box in the top left corner of the page, I would want to change that to the top left reference point and then set the location of my object to 0 and 0 in the X and Y directions. So here, X and Y are the location where your object is on the page, and the W and H are width and height, which is how big it is in the width and the height of it. So if I want it to be at the top left corner of the page and I want it to be 4 inches wide and 2 inches tall, I can adjust all of those things in here rather than trying to kind of go in and use the guides or some other method that might not be as quick or easy. If I want instead the center of the box to be in the center of the page, my page is 18 inches wide and 24 inches tall, so I would want the X dimension to be 9 and the Y to be 12, and now it's in the center of the page. And again, I can adjust the, the width and height of it in the W and H dialog box. If you have this, if you toggle back and forth between this chain being connected or broken, If it's connected and I adjust this to a different dimension, it's going to proportionally adjust the other dimension. So if I want this to be 2 inches high and I want it to stay proportionally, if I want it to stay dimensionally proportionate, I can just have that connected. If I want to be able to control those individually, I would want them to be decoupled. To the bottom left of that is rotate, which is pretty straightforward. It allows for you to rotate objects, and again, it's rotating them around the reference point. So if you notice that it's now rotating it around the bottom left corner, if I want it to rotate around the center, I change the reference point, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to have it be at 0, or 0 rotation. The one to the right of that is skew, so it's going to take it and shift it, you know, a number of degrees in a particular direction. It's called shear in Illustrator. So you can see that it's taking that box and kind of skewing it. You can do the same thing with text. So sample text. I can skew the text box, which also skews the text by using the transform dialog box. Again, we talked about not kind of distorting text in ways that it's not meant to be distorted, so I probably would not do that to the text, just the box around it. Okay, moving objects around. I'm going to put transform back here for future use. Moving things around. I'm going to make this black so you can see it better. I can click something and drag it, right? So that's pretty straightforward. If I have something that is just an outline, like I mentioned in a previous tutorial, you need to click on the actual object, not inside of it where there's no stuff, to be able to move it around. But I can also, if I want to move something in a particular direction, dimension, those sorts of things, there's a move tool, which is, the shortcut for it is M. Command Shift M. I'm getting my shortcuts backwards from different programs. So that brings up this move dialog box. So if I want to take this square, this rectangle, and move it vertically 4 inches at 90 degrees, which means basically straight up, I can do that. Control Shift M. It's moving it in the direction of the, from lower to higher counting on the page. So if I want to move it up, I have to move it against that. So if I want it to go from, 12 to 4, that's -8. -8. And so Control Shift M allows for you to do that. It also allows you to move something at an angle. So if I want to move it, 4 inches and if I want to move it 4 inches total and at 45 degrees, I can click that and it's going to move it 45 degrees, 4 inches in this direction. You can do that for multiple objects, so Control Shift M. If I want to move it 4 inches to the right and 0 inches up, I'm going to click that and it's going to move it around. So moving is pretty important to know how to do. The grids and snaps, we don't have any guidelines on right now, but if we have a guide here and a guide here, most of the time your smart guides are going to be on, which is Command or Control U is the shortcut, which means that if I take an object and start moving it towards something else, it's going to tell me when it hits it, right? It's going to tell me when it intersects it. If I want to move it over here, you can see that it's starting to kind of give me visual cues as to when it's close to something. If I want to do the same thing with this guy and move it over here so that they're connecting on the corner, I can do that. If I want to move something and I want to constrain the direction that it's moving in, if I only want to move it vertically or horizontally, I can hold down Shift. So now I'm moving this object vertically and it's not letting me go off to either side. It's telling me, I'm moving it straight up or down. You can adjust whether something, if you have smart guides turned off and I move something over, it's not gonna tell me when it runs into something, right? I can kind of sort of visually see, but it's not snapping to that object or not snapping to that guide. So I think smart guides are something that's pretty good to have on most of the time. You can also have a grid turned on. So my grid is here in the background. You can see that it's set up in 1-inch increments for the major or the darker lines and 1/4-inch increments for the smaller lines. Under Illustrator Preferences and Guides and Grid, you can go in and adjust, how that works. So if I want a major grid line every 1/2 inch and a minor one every 1/4 inch, oops, 0.5 inches, 0.25 inches. Oh, it's number of subdivisions, I'm sorry, not dimension of subdivisions. So how many subdivisions do you want to have between each major grid line? Hit OK, and then it's changing the grid. So now every 1/2 inch I've got a major line, and every 1/4 inch or 2 divisions between I've got a minor line. So Guides and Grid, grid line every inch, subdivisions I want 4 of them, and I'm going to hit OK. So you can then also under View, you can show the grid, but you can also snap to the grid. So if I want this object to snap to the grid, you can see that it's kind of jumping from grid snap to grid snap, so I can make sure that I'm kind of working in a module, and that also lets you kind of resize objects by grabbing one of their corner points or one of their edges and snapping to that. So make sure that when you turn off the grid, when you stop showing the grid, that you also turn off snapping to the grid. Otherwise, it'll continue snapping to the grid even though you can't see it. Excuse me. So scaling or resizing objects, you can do by adjusting the width and height in the transform dialog box, as we looked at before, or you can do that more kind of manually by selecting the object and grabbing one of the handles. So these white boxes that are in the middle of the line, which lets you adjust it in that direction, or on the corner, which lets you adjust it in this direction. Holding down Shift lets you scale something proportionally, so if you want to make it bigger or smaller, but in both dimensions at the same time, you can hold down Shift on the corner. Yeah, and we will look at the Scale tool, which is this guy here. So the shortcut for it is S, and I can select an object and scale it. So why that's not working, I do not know. Let's see. Scale tool, object selected, scale. Yeah, and the scale tool will go from the center point or from whatever the reference point is, or it will always go from the center point, I'm sorry. And it will go in both directions. So if you want something to be scaling in both directions at the same time, you can turn on the scale tool. There's also a shortcut for doing that, which we talked about before, which is the holding down Shift to control it proportionally, or Shift and Option will let you scale it from the center point rather than having to go through the scale tool. So Shift and Option scales proportionally from the center. Shift takes one corner and scales it proportionally, or with nothing selected, you have kind of complete freedom to move stuff around. Okay. I'm going to give this object a different color than black. Make it red, or pink, or whatever color that is. We're going to talk about layering. So I'm going to move layers up here to the top. Layering is really critical in any sort of computational, anytime you're working in the computer, anytime you're working in a graphic program or a drafting program, or even in file management, it's kind of the same principle, keeping information organized. Right now, if you open up your Layers panel, if you don't have it open, under Window and Layers, or F7 is the shortcut, you can see that we have one layer, and everything is on that same layer. So that means that when we have two things that are kind of competing for space, one is in front of the other one. So these two boxes, by themselves are complete objects, but when I put this one over here, it's covering up a portion of this one. If I want to move that one to the back so I can see all of the black object, I can use some of the arrange components or arrange options. So under object and arrange, I can send this pink box or red box to the back, or I can bring it to the front. So object arrange, bring to front. The shortcuts for that are Command or Control Shift and the bracket keys. We'll just kind of step back and forth between them. I'm going to add a third box to the mix. I'm going to make it green and show you that if you have three things in order of each other, you can do Command and the bracket key, and it will step things one at a time in front of or behind each other. So I'm going to turn off my guides. So Command or Control Shift will step it back and forth. Command and the bracket keys will step it back and forth. Command Shift and the bracket keys will jump it from front to back. So those are called the arrange options, and you can do the same with any object, right? So it's in front of the black one now it's in front of the pink one, and so on and so forth. The other way that you can start to control where information shows up is by putting it on different layers. That also allows you to control its visibility, whether you can adjust it, and those sorts of things. As I mentioned in a previous tutorial, in Adobe programs, anytime you want to make something new, it's this little icon with the kind of corner turned up. I now have a layer 2. To put something on that layer, you can see that when I select it, it has a blue line around it. And you can see that my layer has a blue kind of stripe over here that indicates that things on that layer get highlighted in that color. So right now, if I click on everything, it's all blue. If I want to make this object on the other layer with it selected, I can take this little blue box over here on the right side of my layer and drag it up into the pink box. And now when I click on this object, it's got a pink outline around it. This layer management, or putting things on different layers, allows for a couple of different things, right? It allows for me to be able to change the stack order of objects. So in the same way that we were doing before with arrange options, we can do with layers now too, with objects that are on layers. So if I put layer 2 underneath layer 1, top to bottom is kind of top to bottom, so the top of the list is everything that's in the front, the bottom of the list are things that are in the back. And so I can, I'm just expanding or collapsing these layers, you don't need to worry about that right now. But I can move things above or below. I can also click on the little eyeball to control their visibility, so this is showing up or not showing up. The same with the other layer. Or if I go to the right of that and click in the box that's empty, I can lock it. So now layer 1 is locked, which means that I can't select anything that's on that layer. I can only select things that are on the unlocked layer. If you click to the, sorry, this is turned off. If you click to the right of the layer when it's not locked, it will select everything that's on that layer. So this is something, depending on the complexity of the document that you're working in Illustrator, layers might become helpful to you. In most other programs, InDesign, Photoshop, any of the drafting programs that we're going to be using, layers are critical. So that's one of the reasons it wasn't the first thing we talked about. It's important, but depending on what you're using it for, you might be fine using just one layer. You can make new layers, as I said, by clicking here. You can double click on the layer name to change it. So this is right now, I'm going to make this my green box. And I'm going to select my object and drag it up to that layer. My second box is going to be my black box. I'm going to select the black box, drag it up to that layer, and my last one's going to be my pink box. And my object is already on that layer. And so naming your layers is also important when you have more than one, so that you don't have to kind of mentally remember what it is that's on that layer. You can label it so that you know what's on it, right? Otherwise, when your drawings or your documents start to become more complex, it will become much, much harder to remember. Okay, that is the end of this tutorial. We will cover we'll cover some of the more specialized commands in Illustrator next.